Check Podcasts.
Hi, I'm Bruce Williams. I'm the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to Chamber Chats, coming to you as always from here in the podcasting studios at the Czech Media Group, one of our chamber champions. I would like to acknowledge, as always, that I live and work in the land of the Lekwungen-speaking nations known to us as Songhees and Esquimalt. And all of this is made possible by the support of Island Savings, division of First West Credit Union, who are changing what banking can do for people, for community, and for the planet. So, a lot of news around these areas because we have 13 municipalities, but it seems that most of the conversation focuses on one, and that one, of course, is the city of Victoria. And all of the municipal governments right now are into their third year of operation, and we're going to chat about a number of the mayors, including today. We're going to chat with Marianne Alto, who's the mayor of the city of Victoria. Mayor, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity.
So a little bit over 2 years now.
Focus on Victoria. It's the best. It's the best city of them all.
Well,
Absolutely.
of course it is. Yes. So 2 years and a bit into
Yeah.
council right now. So, and you were faced with 7 new faces at the council table. So some people said, well, that's a little bit of the Wild West, but the orientation progress has been underway. Tell me about how it's been for the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's been really fascinating, and as you know, we spent the whole first year actually really doing a significant amount of orientation for the new council members. You'll know that, of course, Councillor Coleman has a great deal of experience, but also retired in 2018, and so did not experience the COVID term, which of course changed everything, as everyone knows. So for the other 7, his understanding and his climb back into understanding the processes was perhaps more shallow than the rest. But for the rest, we very deliberately spent a big chunk of the first year providing them with opportunities to learn about policy and planning and procedures and how you make decisions and why and all that sort of things. And I think that was a really great investment because, after the first few months, we started layering in heavier and heavier agendas where they were facing some very complicated decisions. And as the year went on, I think that they certainly made more informed decisions for sure. That doesn't necessarily mean you can predict the outcome, but a greater confidence in the fact that they knew how to do it and were making a higher degree of informed decision making. So I think it was a long time, but it was a good investment in time. And certainly by now, there's a comfort, I think, with much of the procedures and policies that you can now see the individuals emerge as far as their own passions and their own priorities and their own perspectives and that sort of thing. And that was a bit hard to see when they were sort of learning how to do things. But now that they know that, you can see very much about where their particular issues lie.
You, of course, have been through that process yourself when you were first elected to council. There must be some time in that period when you think, what have I gotten myself in? I didn't know it was going to be this much stuff going on. Like, that must happen, right?
It does, for sure. And I think that people come into local government with very different expectations. And it depends a little bit upon how much research you do. I came in having done a lot of research and having been around various orders of government in different ways for a lot of years. So I wasn't terribly surprised when I was first elected. And I think that isn't necessarily the case for all of my colleagues. I think there are greater and lesser degrees of how much research was done. But certainly when I became mayor in 2022, I again had a fairly good idea about what it would involve because I had watched and worked with 2 very, very different mayors over the years. And so it was really great for me to be able to sort of select different ways of working from both of them and then create something entirely new. So, anytime you change seats or anytime you take up a new seat, you learn a lot and you bring your perspectives to the fore, obviously. But it's important, I think, to start by listening and learning before you start making decisions.
So within a council, yours or others, there are always very clear alliances, those who work together sort of as almost like a slate, but they work together on things. But there's also divisions within the people who are at the table, and it's up to you as the sheriff to take care of all that stuff. So how do you manage all of that stuff?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think of myself less of a sheriff as I do as a facilitator. And certainly that's been my day job for a long time when my small business was my actual small business when it was running full time. And I think what you have to do as a facilitator is you have to understand from the beginning kind of what your end goal is, but you have to not be wedded to getting there in a particular way. And you also have to not be wedded to being stuck on that particular end goal, because it may be that as you head towards it, you learn different things and you have different priorities pointed out to you so you can adapt. But there's no doubt at all that policies and procedures are important as tools to help you along the way. And I've certainly taken some time over the last couple of years to refine some of those. And so you'll know that now we have time limits on speaking. Now we have the opportunity for consent agendas, which we didn't have before. we've had to revamp what we do with the evening council meetings once the provincial government prohibited public hearings. And so that gave us an opportunity actually to reinvent them in a way which allowed for greater public input. And for example, just a couple of weeks ago, maybe just a week ago, we had the first of our quarterly opportunities for organizations that receive significant funding from the city to come and speak to us for 10 minutes just to tell us what they're doing and what they did with the money and that sort of thing. And that's never had a chance to happen before. So we're exploring new ways to engage with people and taking advantage of the new opportunities we have.
You reference rather a relationship with the provincial government, and as municipal government, you do deal with other levels of government. We have a new provincial government in British Columbia. I want to talk about that next. Our guest on Chamber Chats today is Marianne Alto. She's the mayor of Victoria. So yeah, recently we had a change in sort of the same government, but a change in profile. New cabinet has come in. How do you think that relationship's going to be different now with this version of a David Eby government?
Yeah. I think there'll be some similarities, but some differences. We deal specifically and primarily with a number of ministries. Housing is one, obviously. It's a huge issue for my council and also a huge issue for everyone, frankly. And so the marriage, again, as it was many years ago, of housing and municipal affairs, I think has a lot of potential. There's a curiosity about it in the sense of, does that mean that the provincial government is understanding and acknowledging the very tight relationship between those two things? And also, does that mean that they're going to rely even more heavily on local governments to execute their policies? Because certainly the ones that they've brought forward in the last year and a half have relied very heavily on local governments to be able to make them come into fruition. So that'll be interesting. In the city of Victoria, particularly, we're looking forward to a really interesting relationship with the Solicitor General and also the new is he a parliamentary secretary or a minister of state? I think he's a minister of state for community safety, which is exactly what we were requesting. And it was interesting. I actually wrote a letter to the premier just not about a week or 10 days ago, actually suggesting that there should be some greater attention to community safety. And at the time suggested that the Solicitor General might be perhaps provided in their mandate letter with some direction to work more closely with communities that were working on such a plan, which we are, as you know. And so it was kind of good to see that Minister of State actually created for that position. I don't know either of those people, but I expect to know them really well because we're very much, we have a very significant emphasis on that in the next couple of years. So that's going to be interesting. Health, obviously, is a massively important ministry. Interesting to see them take the former Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions and absorb it into health. I actually think that's good because mental health and addiction should be part of the larger conversation on health. At the same time, I'm a little worried because sometimes when you take in whole areas of health, they can get a little lost in the large consideration of the whole picture. But I'm hopeful that won't be the case in this because obviously there's some thought put into the relationship between mental health and addictions and the larger conversation on health. So that's good. Municipal affairs, obviously, being attached to housing is different. But there is, I believe, if I recall, a minister of state dealing with, I can't remember what it was called, whether it was communities and rural communities or local government and communities. But it does point to the fact that there is still a recognition that there needs to be some type of an emphasis and a focus on local governments. And so that's good. So I think, Solicitor General for us, community safety, health, obviously housing and municipal affairs. Transportation too. It's interesting to see that the former Solicitor General, now the Minister of Transportation, he's from a larger community. He's lots of experience. We're obviously keenly wanting to be involved with the whole issue around housing in the major transportation corridors, in which we're already looking at. So I mean, all of those are kind of the ones that we will probably have the most direct relationship with. And some of them are familiar, some of them are new. It's going to be a really interesting relationship building exercise over the next couple of years.
Yeah, they put rural, I know, in one of those positions because they didn't win a lot of votes
Yeah,
in the rural areas. They won in
yeah,
the cities. That's where they get their seats from.
that's
And
right.
when you talk about healthcare, you and I have talked about this before, but we're a politically agnostic organization. But I can vouch for the fact that I've known Josie Osborne for many years, and she is a very, very capable person. So we have lots of faith in
Yes,
that.
I would echo that. And it's a big, big job. And so we'll have our fingers crossed. And obviously, with all of those ministries and with any of the ministries with the provincial government, we have to acknowledge that, we are a different level of government, obviously, and we have different responsibilities. But as everyone knows who's watched not just this council, but every council over the last decade or so, local governments have been forced into areas where they traditionally have never gone. And some of that is because there have been gaps from other orders of government, and some of it is just because there are issues that no one ever expected to have to deal with on a local level. And we're certainly venturing into those areas, and that will require, of course, some even greater, I think, collaboration with the provincial order of government.
Yeah, we've had this conversation before, but at our AGM earlier this year, we, in front of you, asked David Eby if he was
Yes.
prepared to come up with some funding because the
Yeah.
municipalities are now dealing with shelter, which is housing and healthcare and that sort of thing. Any hope of any transfer of money back, do you think, for that stuff you're doing?
Well, I hope so. Yes, I had to laugh out loud as I was there, as you did say, and I think his answer was the check is not in the mail,
Yeah, that's right.
or something like that. But we do still hope that there will be a greater recognition, and again, this goes back to perhaps the marriage of housing and municipal affairs, greater recognition that as the provincial government imposes new policies, but also wants to move forward on some of its particular priorities, they can't do so really effectively without the collaboration and cooperation with local governments. And if local governments are taking more and more and more of what used to be other orders of government responsibilities, and they are, and I can have that conversation with you for a long time,
Mhm.
it is unreasonable to think that that will happen without a change in the way the tax dollars are distributed. And you'll be aware that the Federation of Canadian Municipalities has been facilitating that conversation for a few years. And there has been some movement on the federal government side, at least the current federal governments, to be part of those conversations. You can't expect any order of government to start taking on new work unless there's an ability to resource it adequately. And so that has to be a conversation at some point.
The members of the chamber that are based in Victoria would say that their number one concern right now is street safety.
Yes.
That's something it's not widespread across the region. There's pockets of it here and there across all 13 municipalities, but the situation in Victoria, especially in the downtown area, is of concern to a lot of people. I don't feel it's severe as many people think it is, but it's still a crime and it's a tragedy unto itself.
Mhm.
And you probably hear from a lot of people about that all the time. So when they express, what are you going to do about what's going on the street? What's your answer?
Yeah, it's a complicated question with more than one answer, and I think that's the thing that people say is that if it was an easy answer, we'd have done it already. It's not easy, but it is coming, and there's no doubt that the complexities of it have different pieces. So you will have seen, or your viewers will have seen, that the city has been moving relatively aggressively. I think it's fair to say in trying to relocate folks off of the greatest concentration that's visible, and that's on Pandora Avenue. But we've done so in a way which has been waiting for the provincial government. And I want to stress this because we've made the position clear that we're not just going to randomly move people. We have to be able to rely on having a place for them to go. That's not our job, let's be clear. But we have been given assurances, and we have to believe them, that BC Housing, as the arm of the provincial government's policies and construction, essentially, of housing at various levels across the continuum of both supportive and affordable housing. They've assured us in the summer that they do have adequate shelter spaces for all of the people who are on Pandora Avenue right now or have been on Pandora. And so once we were given that assurance, we rely upon that to begin to relocate people in phases. And folks will have seen that it's happened gradually, over the last few months. We're a little concerned that perhaps the assertions of BC Housing haven't been quite as fulsome as we had been told, because we don't see everyone that we expected to go into shelter. So that's a bit concerning. Nevertheless, we've made the commitment that we are going to move on Pandora Avenue and to disperse the encampment. When that happens with any encampment, not just on Pandora, you see some people who take advantage of other opportunities and do that, and you see some people who, for a variety of reasons, don't, and then they're dispersed into other areas. So with that, then there becomes a greater concern with individuals at different places, not just throughout the downtown, but throughout the city. So that's meant that we've had an increase in bylaw enforcement. We've had an increase in our cooperation with the police services, but we've also had some really important conversations around community safety generally, with business owners, with residents, with a variety of folks who have a variety of different perspectives and opinions and ability to contribute to the solutions in short and long terms. And you know, I've talked about the fact that the city's nearing the end of the first part of its community safety and well-being initiative, which is looking at very extensive changes to the way we do operations and service delivery, and new operations as well existing within the ambit of the city, which will be coming to council in the next few months. And there'll be some immediate things that will happen if council adopts this, as well as some long-term systemic changes. And those are obviously done in conjunction with policing. Policing is absolutely a part of this. I want to make sure people understand that this is nothing to do with undermining police at all. In fact, it's just the opposite. But there are many, many more things that we can do within local government authority that add on to what policing does. And that's where we'll be going in the next couple of months and years. It's a long-term position.
We can't spend time with you without talking about taxes. So we're going to do
Of
that.
course.
We're going to do
Yes.
that next. Our guest today on Chamber Chats is Marianne Alto. She is the mayor of the city of Victoria. Um, I get a lot of reaction from people who are business owners or
Yes.
tenants in a building and have suddenly had this alarming increase in their property taxes. I've heard of some that are up to 40%. So I know that BC assessment is involved in all of that. But what, again, is the answer to somebody who's going to pick up the phone and call you and say, what the hell is going on here? Why are my taxes going up so much? What's the
Yeah.
answer to that?
Yeah. It's a great question, and it's again, unfortunately, not a simple answer. You've touched on part of it, and that's the BC assessment piece, which looks at the assessed value of a property, not necessarily in its current form, but its potential. So that's a whole different conversation about where that's going in the future.
Yeah, it's called the best, is it best use or best and
Yes, yes, the highest and best use.
highest and best use? Yeah.
And so, if I have a property which has a little house on it right now, but it's in a zoning area where I could build something that's 6 stories, I'm leaning towards what it could be if it was 6 stories. And so we are having conversations with BC Assessment about the fairness of that or lack of fairness of that. But that's a longer term conversation. So in the short term, obviously, we're looking at the 2025 and 2026 budgets with a pretty hard lens. And you'll know, and your viewers will know that when we first started assessing this, we were looking at increases that were in double digits, between 12 and 13%, which is extreme. That does include policing, by the way. So it's police costs are incorporated into the city's budget. And so we've essentially gone back to our staff and said, not okay.
Hmm.
And so excising out the police budget, which is about 3.5%, we are looking back and said to our staff a couple of weeks ago now, okay, we want you to go away. We want you to look at everything that you're doing, and we want you to come back and tell us what it would look like, what it would take if the city's portion of the annual tax increase was capped at a variety of places. So we started at 4% and went through to 7%. And said, well, come back and tell us if it was 4%, and again, police is separate. If it was 4%, what would that look like? And is that cutting staff? Is it cutting programs? Is it whatever or not? And then moving all the way through to 7%. And so that's going to come back to us on the 12th of December. And we'll then be able to look at that and begin to make some difficult decisions. The police have already given us their budget requests, and we've actually returned to them and asked them also to take a hard second look. We don't know whether or not that will result in anything. We're very aware that I think at this moment in time that the majority of folks seem comfortable with a significant increase in police services costs, so that we're not really looking at that as a significant amount, but still it's good for everyone to have a look. And so once we get those numbers back from staff, we'll be looking at what's possible, what's reasonable in the next 2 years, we'll be looking at it as a bundle. It's hard, there's no doubt, and we're not alone, and you'll be seeing throughout the region some similar conversations, I'm sure. The difference for us, of course, is not just the cost of everything, but municipal governments, when they buy products, they pay a different rate than you and I would pay as individuals, which is a difficult thing to explain to people. So imagine my costs are going up. Well, municipal costs are even greater, and so that means that we're not just looking at standard cost of living, but we're looking at municipal cost of living, and that's a different rate. And so there's lots to hammer out here. We're very well aware that what we were proposing rather, is extreme. And I just want to add one thing. One of the things, particularly for the business aspect, I actually also added on to that request to staff a particular request, and that was to look at the differential tax rate for businesses, business owners, managers, and workers for the land use piece. Right now, a business pays, I believe, if I'm correct in recalling this, is 3.67 times what residents would pay. And so I've asked them to go back and look at what impact would it have if that was reduced to 3.5 or 3 or even 2.5. And the outcome of that, we don't know yet, but we know that it would be significant. And unfortunately, because municipalities are not allowed to run deficits, we have to shift that tax somewhere, which means that as the business tax rate goes down, the residential tax goes up. And so again, it's going to be a balancing point about how much anyone can actually afford on in a balancing act. It's always a balance. So I wanted to do that because I wanted to indicate that we're very well aware of the stress that businesses are under, and we are looking at every potential to try and bring some balance to that.
Yeah, and that percentage you talk about is different in each municipality too.
Yes, it
Yours,
is.
yours, as you say, is just over 3%.
Yes,
So
that's right.
less than 2 years left in the mandate of this current council. Some people might start to think in their head, "Gee, maybe I should run next time." What advice would you have for somebody who is considering running for public office?
I think it's far too soon to think about that to start with. But certainly someone who's running for public office in Victoria, I think where you really have to embrace the fact that this is a city in the midst of tremendous change. And certainly I talk very much about, as you well know, about that change being intentional and us trying to manage any amount of it that might be random. Change is inevitable, but I think that there's utility in thinking as a local government elected person that you can bring some intentionality to it and try and scope out some of that change in a way which has a pattern, makes sense, speaks to the future, all those things that you want to say. But it's a difficult job. And I think that certainly the the moment in time in which we find ourselves right now is extremely critical, and you need um, a lot of patience. You need to understand the limitations of your job and what it actually is, because I think too often some folks come to the local government table imagining doing things which are well beyond the authority of local governments, and that's not particularly helpful. So you need to be really clear about what you're expecting from being at that table. Do a lot of research. Make sure you understand what it's like to be at the table. I often said to people with whom I worked on campaigns, on the one hand, it's easy to lose because you know you're going to go on and do something else the next day. It's much more challenging to win because now you're at a table, you need to be prepared to be there. And I would say one thing, I had a session at the Union of BC Municipalities earlier this year, an unusual session where they had some very interesting panelists speaking about what it's like to be an elected person these days, which is quite different than it was even when I started. And one of the sayings that someone brought forward actually was the sense of people often think the longer you're elected, the thicker your skin gets. And the opinion was given that that isn't the case. It's that the longer you're elected, the better you get at hiding the impact of being an elected person. And I think that that's true. Certainly, I've been at this table for more than 14 years now. And the experiences that I think are encountered by everyone at an elected table are so profoundly different for a whole variety of reasons that you need to be, I think, prepared to be a target. You need to be prepared to weather some significant personal attacks. And you need to be comfortable that the reason that you're there is for the greater good and that that's okay.
Good answer. And as always, we've run out of time because we just have so much to talk about. So we'll have to do this again soon.
Always,
We always appreciate your time, Marianne Alto. Thank you for being with us today.
always a great pleasure. Thanks, Bruce.
I'm Bruce Williams, and we will see you again for another Chamber Chat.